So I'm going to make a couple of quick comments, and then I'm going to let David take over, and then we'll take some questions from the floor. This has been a long day, as it has for David, because he's calling in from London and calling in visually and vocally from London, and he's agreed to do this at night for us. We have heard lots of interesting speakers, and I wanted to have you all to have the opportunity to have a conversation with Lord David Puttnam, who is currently the Chancellor of the Open University in the UK, has been a film producer, film director, filmmaker, and has thought about education. And I had the privilege of meeting David about 8 years ago when I was running the organization Curriki, which is the OER K through 12 curriculum platform, and David and I talked about how education was going to change. I spoke with David a few months ago in London, and I asked him what he thought of what was happening with Coursera and open courses and MOOCs, and he laughed and said, well, we were doing that 25 years ago. So I'm going to let David tell you about it and start out. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Bobbi, very much indeed. It's really nice to be able to join you. It's been a beautiful day here in London. It's now 9 o'clock at night, but I'm not yet waning, and I hope not to put you to sleep the next few minutes. What I'd like to do, if I may, is kick off with a little film I made. This is actually cut down from a half-hour film that was made 66 years ago. And with the exception of the comment that's made about employment, I don't think we could argue with a single word of the commentary of literally the one and a little bit minute film that I'd like to show you. So Scott, could you run that for me? There we go.
The United States today faces a complex world society in which the relative strength of ideas and ideologies can be decisive. Priding herself on a mighty public school system, America is awakening to the fact that her schools are ill-equipped for today, inadequate for the future. Millions of our children are acquiring a second-rate education. And as America's population increases, the urgency of the problem becomes overwhelming. There is today a job for all the people. Here they live, and here are their children and their schools. And they must decide whether their public schools are equal to the changing times and to the needs of a free people. For the problem of our schools lies at the heart of our free society, and none of man's institutions has a deeper import for his destiny as a citizen, be it in the community, the nation, or the world. Time marches on.
Now, I'd have a couple of observations about that. The first is, as I said, 66 years ago. Bear in mind, 1947, the United States really didn't have any other competitive nation to concern itself with. The challenge was essentially an internal one. It certainly wasn't particularly an external one. And yet, today, the situation could hardly be more different. I've just returned recently from Asia. Many of you will have been to Asia looking at the situation there. This is a highly competitive world, and yet many of the problems that film touches on, I think, are equally true today. In some cases, maybe more severe. This being Teacher Appreciation Week, which I only found out today, which seems very, very touching. Here's another point that I'd just like to make, and I've made this a long while. It's been kind of slightly usurped by other people recently, but for 10 years, I've been trying to make this same point, and it seems worth making. The surgeon, this is 1913, 100 years ago. The surgeon in the foreground is a man called Mykola Azimov. He was a Ukrainian heart surgeon. He was by far the most famous surgeon in the world at the time and operated right the way through the First World War. It made him a very, very important figure. But he was the doyen of surgeons. And we would all agree, you put him into there today, there is nothing whatsoever he could do. Nothing. Every single one of that brilliant surgeon's skills would have been obviated by a combination of technology and knowledge. So in fact, in the intervening 100 years, Mr. Amosov could literally, or Professor Amosov, could have done nothing other than stand in that operating theatre today, probably with his mouth open, admiring what was going on. And yet, as we would all agree, in truth, she, bless her heart, could have taught an excellent class in most subjects in 1913, and she's nicely midway between the two, and she could probably do a decent job today working in a classroom that wouldn't be that dissimilar from the one in the image. That is a huge, huge challenge to us. How is it possible that the world of medicine, and let's just stay with medicine for a moment, there are other worlds we could use. How is it possible that the world of medicine's moved on in the way it has, in terms of what's been achieved, the way that technology and knowledge has driven it, and yet somehow or other this remarkable and equally vital world of education has languished? I would argue languished. There's one other tiny little film I'd like to show you. Many of you will be familiar with this from a few years ago, but every single time I show this to teachers, two things happen. There's a silence for a moment, and then there's a kind of titter of laughter, and that laughter is a laughter of recognition, in that every single teacher I ever show this to recognizes exactly what's going on here. Scott, could you just run this? This is, again, 1 minute.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
So that's essentially, I would argue, where we found ourselves. We are managing, in many, many instances, to absolutely bore children, young people, to death. And they are increasingly beginning to think that it's we, the educators, who are the problem, that we just don't get it, that we have not yet joined their world. But of course, that's only half the story. And what I wanted to focus on, if I may, because I'd like to think it's not something you'll have touched on previously today, is a phenomenon that is taking place, a really, really encouraging thing, which in a sense gives the lie to many of the shibboleths that you hear discussed about education. As this slide says, teachers have, for many, many years, had filing cabinets, literally filing cabinets worth of tried and tested classroom resources. They know what they're doing. In many, many cases, they know what they're doing, and fine teachers are fine teachers, have always been fine teachers. But here's a problem. Many of those fine teachers are not digital natives. In fact, they're not digital, full stop. And so a lot of those fantastic lesson plans are literally locked up in filing cabinets and only exist on paper or in the memories and minds of the teachers delivering them. And one of the things I've been working on, I have an interesting role at the moment. I'm digital champion for Ireland. I live on the west coast of Ireland. Looking at ways of pushing out the digital agenda in Ireland. One of the things we're definitely doing is we're taking the best of those retired or near retired teachers and ensuring that the best of their lesson plans, very, very best ideas, these tried and tested ideas, are turned into a digital form. And we're doing that by combining a competition, something that will appeal to many, many people in the audience here. We're creating a competition with the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, and the young people in that college are charged with taking the best of these lesson plans and turning them into an exciting, vigorous digital form. We think that will begin the movement of things. We think that teachers will begin to come forward with the very best of their work, and we also hope that some of those teachers will become inspired to start doing it themselves. There's no reason at all why the teacher shouldn't become familiar with Final Cut Pro or any number of other very, very good and very exciting audiovisual technologies and begin to do this themselves. But this is only the tip of an iceberg, because then there's another group, which is the digital natives. When I started on this epic journey of mine almost 20 years ago, basically very, very few teachers, if any, hardly any teachers could be described as digital natives. Today, I would think possibly a third to a half of the profession have a full and very good understanding of what's digitally possible. And that's beginning to drive a lot of behaviors. And here's the next slide I want to show you. Teachers love to share their lesson plans. This is just one site. I happen to be chairman, but it's a lovely job I have. I'm chairman of the Times Educational Supplement Advisory Board, and all these figures are derived from the TSL, a single site, TSL Direct. These numbers are phenomenal. 71% of these resources are teacher created. That's to say they've got nothing to do with any proprietary brand or company or anything else. These are being driven by teachers for teachers. And that, just look at that growth chart. 2006, 4,486 of them. This year, we will bust through 600,000. This is a quite phenomenal level of growth. I'm not sure how many of you, certainly I don't, see many charts with that type of curve to them. They all tended to end in about 2006. But this is happening right now. Now, I say teachers love to share. This is what they're sharing. Now look at what they're downloading. But basically, the lesson plans as they're put up go into a system. They come from the teaching community. They go to a subject lead. That lead then turns it round into a teaching panel who begins to assess the best of this material, and that goes back up. And this is what happens. TES Connect, this is one site. There are a number of very, very good sites. This is just one site, driven by teachers, for teachers. In this coming year, 130 million, at least, downloads of lesson plans. This is teachers talking to teachers. It's free. They're not required to do it. This is teachers putting their ideas, their lesson plans, online for other teachers at a level and a rate that I would argue no one has fully understood. I tried this out at a conference recently in San Diego, tried to find out how many people, what kind of level of downloading was taking place. The highest figure anyone in a very large audience was prepared to gamble on was 2 million. 2 million, 130 million. And bear in mind that most of this material, vast majority of it, is based on the UK curriculum. So these are phenomenal numbers. And where do they come from? Well, basically they're rapidly all over the world. We're creating lesson plans, or the system is managing to create lesson plans everywhere. Sorry, my clicker's not clicking. There we go. Just a small selection from the US. I'll make all of this available to Bobbi, and any of you who want to look at it at your leisure, more than welcome. So this is genuinely international in anyone's terms. The other thing that I think probably we all need reminding of is the fact that the profession we're dealing in here is the largest profession in the world. There are 80 million teachers worldwide. And again, if you study this for a moment, you'll see exactly where people are registering and where the downloading is coming from. More than 84% of UK teachers, 84%, downloaded at least one resource in 2012. An average of 9,000 non-UK registrants a week. It's on the TSL platforms. Please look at the US chart in the middle at the bottom from launch. It's climbing, if anything, climbing the fastest of all of them. Now, here's the US exploded slightly. 7.5 million, we estimate, this year, 2013. But look how steep that climb is. It is moving at an extraordinary rate. And again, I want to emphasize, this is just one site. I'll show you one other site in a moment. I'm hopefully in the Q&A, you'll challenge my description of it being a phenomenon. For me, it is a phenomenon because it proves that teachers are very active. They want to improve their own work. They want to help other teachers to improve theirs. They are, in every single sense, a community. And the most interesting figure for me is the average year-on-year growth across the US. 335% growth this year in resources downloaded in the US. Here's another site, Promethean Planet. Again, much more US focused. Over 1 million downloads in October of last year, and 7.5 million in the year. Pattern's a fairly familiar one to many of you. You'll notice a seasonal pattern, quite predictable and quite understandable as to when teachers, there's a spurt in downloads and when it changes. This is, I'll stop. Scott, could you stop this 1 second? Thanks. This is a film I've been showing recently quite a bit with Steven Spielberg's permission. This really addresses the whole issue of disruption and when dramatic change takes place. I find this a very, very useful clip. And please, as far as I'm concerned, please feel free. I'm sure Mr. Spielberg will be delighted. There are inflection moments. And those inflection moments are driven by a whole series of things. Here's one. This is a 3-minute clip from the film Warhorse. Can you run it, Scott? I'm sorry, it's in a sense a little crude, but it is the nub of my argument. Hiram Maxim invented the machine gun in about 15 years before that. He couldn't sell it. In fact, he could barely give it away. It was regarded as unaffordable. And in any event, the cavalry, the army liked its cavalry. The cavalry had stood it in very good stead for 2,500 years, and they didn't really see any reason to change. Following that incident, or that battle, everyone had to change. Everything changed. Not only did they suddenly become affordable, they became an absolute necessity. And literally, the nature of warfare altered. I sincerely believe, this takes me back to that very first film, I sincerely believe that that's the point we've reached in education. It is not a question of affordability. To use a crude phrase, it's actually a question of productivity. We have got to dramatically improve the productivity of education. We need to turn out smarter, brighter, more adaptable, more interested, and more engaged young people. Because if we don't, frankly, Western democracies are going to find themselves floundering 5, 10, 15, and 20 years from now. That is, I regard, an absolute necessity. And I've thrown in this last slide because I think it's interesting. A lot of people say, well, it can't be done. Well, can't be done In 1950, it appeared, certainly the world food people believed, that we were heading for a very, very serious problem in terms of feeding the world. Between 1950 and 1984, world grain production increased by over 250% because science, technology, farming, and distribution got together and made it happen. Somehow or other, we need to pull off a trick as dramatic as the productivity revolution that occurred in grain production during those years. It may sound as though it's a complicated read across, or maybe a wrongful read across. We're talking about young people after all. But somehow or other, we've got to find a way of moving education along in our Western democracies to a point at which the young people we are educating are seriously able to take their place in the middle of the 21st century, dealing with challenges the like of which many of us can only very, very dimly even begin to think about. So that's me setting up my stall. Bobbi, do you want to lead us into some questions?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you very much. That was very, very well done. I'm going to start with a question because I know TES Connect very well, and the woman running it is a phenomenal woman entrepreneur, Louise Rogers. But I do have a question. Why do you think having Iran Kuriki, which was a shared lesson plan, we have Better Lesson, we have a variety of these. What do you think that they're doing that's causing this dramatic growth in their numbers and their usage compared to the other sites? Because they're so significantly different numbers. 130 million is a significantly different number.
I think it comes down to brand, to be honest, Bobbi. I think that the TES was in itself a trusted brand. I think it's a place that teachers were used to going to for information. They certainly were going to it for jobs and still do. So I think a lot of it is literally down to that, a trusted brand. But then again, having done it, finding themselves on a Sunday night, panicking slightly and wondering about the coming week, discovering there is a site you can go on, which 9 times out of 10 is giving you what you want, and then being able then to recommend that to other teachers, I think is extraordinary. One really interesting thing, when I talk to policymakers about this, what comes back in terms of, along with incredulity, is we don't understand this. We talk to a lot of principals. Principals are not telling us that this is what's happening. Why? I'm not sure many teachers are telling their principals this is what's happening. Why would you necessarily tell your principal if regularly on a Sunday night, you're actually getting a great deal of information you need for the coming week off of a site? And one of the things I'm very excited about is the idea that we could, between us, begin to catalyze this activity, really catalyze this activity, to a point at which it so benefited the school, maybe by micropayments, whatever, that principals, instead of being left out of the loop, would become part of the loop and actually start encouraging both the uploading and downloading activity. But I do think in the case of TES, it comes down to trusted brand. And that doesn't mean that it isn't possible for a number of other trusted brands to emerge over the next five years.
All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience. One of the other things that we have had this morning, our competition for our entrepreneurs. So I'm curious to see what they have to ask you about entrepreneurship in education in the UK. Microphones? Okay, questions?
Hi, how you doing? My name is Kande Roberts. I'm a fellow Brit. I was brought up and raised in London. And I came to the States when I was about 16, and I've been here ever since. But I'd like to probably get your opinion on innovation and change in education in England, especially in regards to the sort of established mentality that who are you to change things. I felt I came across a lot in England. And maybe just touch upon, you're speaking about a lot of drastic change, but how do you compare that to some of the things that are going on in America and the American attitude towards change as opposed to the English attitude?
Okay, Connie, I think, well, first of all, I'd say broadly speaking, and this is from a limited knowledge base of the US, I think there's a greater appetite for change at the moment, which is very surprising, incidentally, in the UK than in the US. I think there's less, if anything, there's less resistance to change. Teachers are not natural change agents. I think it's something they worry about. One of the reasons they quite rightly worry is they're worried sick about making mistakes and affecting the life chances of a whole cohort of young people. So they're naturally conservative in that sense. Why was I able to be effective? I don't know if you were here when I started doing this in the mid-90s. Two things. I started the National Teaching Awards, which started with enormous skepticism initially from the unions. The unions basically wanted the position in the UK that a teacher was a teacher was a teacher, and they did not want individual teachers celebrated. They actually believed that if you celebrated individual teachers, somehow that diminished the other. Well, they couldn't have been more wrong. We were very lucky. We have the BBC as a partner. It goes out nationwide once a year. And we also had regional awards. But the most interesting thing is this. Not one teacher in 16 years, not one teacher has ever gone up on the stage and collected an award on television without saying, this isn't for me. This is for my school. This is for the kids. This is my colleagues. I got the greatest head. And that's what the speeches are. Time and time. Bobbi, I could send you almost hundreds of them now. Also, we get stars, movie stars, to come and do them. What is quite extraordinary is how many movie stars and television stars have either parents or siblings who are teachers. Helen Mirren, for example, both her mother and her sister are teachers. They are more than delighted to come along and celebrate the profession and talk up the profession. So I think that helped me. Then I became the inaugural chairman of the General Teaching Council, and that at least started off pretty well. I'm afraid this current government decided to scrap it, but we got off to a good start. So, well, we won't go into politics, but so I think I became, we talked about trusted brands just now, I think, and someone may tell you very differently, I think I became a trusted figure. I also visited 400 schools. I made it my business to actually understand this extraordinary world of education, primary and secondary in particular. And I don't know, I mean, all I wanted was what was good for the profession, and slowly we were able to overcome the skeptics. And the teaching award was a very good example. In the end, by making the individual unions trustees of the awards, they came around. Now, I think the unions be the very first people to bitterly complain if anything was done to either denigrate or scrap the awards. So you have to, in a sense, you've got to prove it by doing it. And we did.
Along with that question, I would like for you to kind of elaborate on the fact that so far, I think the entrepreneur community, while UK may be doing more change within, we seem to have a big growth of entrepreneurs in education here, and that's just happening in the UK because of a variety of reasons. What do you think the reason it's been slower in the UK versus over here?
I think we're more naturally edgy about the state role in education and the notion of it going private. Don't forget, we've had a private education sector forever. It has never budged. The needle's never budged. It's always been around 7%. It's gone as low as 6.5% and as high as 7.5%. But it's never moved out of that 6.5%, 7.5% area. And most teachers in Britain see themselves as, in the best sense of the word, public servants. They see themselves as serving their profession and serving their students. And there is I wouldn't say skepticism, there's a very natural caution about moving education into an area where the for-profit component becomes dominant. The paid-for area, which we ridiculously call public schools, I've never quite understood that, but our public schools in the UK had managed very, very intelligently to be seen as a thing apart. They're totally unaffordable for most people in Britain. I mean, when I say totally, I mean totally unaffordable, and they're associated with a class. It's a class issue. So we haven't ever developed a hybrid model. We've never developed a paid-for model which is accepted by the general populace as being the way to go, or maybe the right way to go. I was with Mike Milken about a month ago, and Josh, Josh may well be with you. And Josh and Mike told me an extraordinary statistic, which has really stayed with me, that in an average I hope I got this right, the average middle-class Asian family spends 16% of its supplemental income, of its disposable income on supplemental education. That's to say, over and above what the state provides. The average similar family in the United States spends 2%. Now you have to begin to ask yourself, at what point do those chickens begin to come home to roost? In the UK, the idea of serious expenditure by families on supplemental education is still something of a it kind of doesn't fit actually with our social democratic norms. Does that mean it will always be that way? I don't know. But for the time being it is. And that must be quite frustrating for genuine entrepreneurs trying to get into the British system, because in theory, this is very important to say, in theory, the British marketplace is fantastic. It's centrally controlled, it's well funded, and it ought to be penetrable by entrepreneurs who are able to give themselves credentials that the public trust.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? I think we have one over here. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Michelle McKeown, and I'm one of the participants of this competition. And I just want to say I really loved your introduction because I very much agree that we're still educating students in a system from the industrial age, and we're in a very different society, maybe the age of ideas. So I'm looking at your graphs with all of that content, and as a teacher who has been through Promethean Planet and has looked at 1,000 wikis, I don't really see a lot of that content being innovative or even useful. It's not well organized, and I know you mentioned you spoke to a system of really aggregating that content and putting it into a system. But I think, and I'm going to kind of throw this out there to kind of challenge a little bit, I think by doing that, you're really just kind of reinforcing that industrial age model. And I would even maybe throw something out really radical and say, maybe we don't need to teach content anymore. Maybe we need to teach web development. And through that process of organizing information on a web page, the content dissemination comes, kind of through this diffusive process rather than, an organization structure or hierarchy to information.
Michelle, I don't disagree with a word you're saying. I mean, if I was surprised in what you're saying, something that I've felt and probably haven't been brave enough to say. What amazes me most about that 130 million number is actually the content itself is ordinary. Let's choose that. Just take the word ordinary. It's really very ordinary. It's not at all that exciting. I spent the last, and certainly have failed horribly in this, I spent the last 10 years trying to get the games industry interested in education, because they do understand excitement. They really do understand how to create invigorating material, or really extraordinary material. That's been something of a failure, but I don't think it's going to remain a failure. I think we're waiting for, if I can take you back for a second, I was a filmmaker for most of my life, and I'm a real student of film, and I love cinema. Cinema was like a circus act in its early days. It was literally exploding policemen. You've seen the Fred Carno stuff. It was exploding policemen and people falling over. Charlie Chaplin was the very best end of it. It wasn't until D.W. Griffiths came along with Birth of a Nation that cinema kind of grew up and actually realized what it could be. Okay, interestingly, if you or I had been around in let's take 100 years, in 1913, and suggested that movies would settle down as being 90 to 110 minute narrative entertainments, people would have got the white coats and taken us to the loony bin. They really would. It was so improbable. And I think what we're waiting for, if you like, is the D.W. Griffith, the Steven Spielberg. We're waiting for the person that shows how amazing this can be. And I believe it'll happen. And the encouraging thing about those charts, really, Michelle, is that there's people out there that want it. And if they're offered it and they can find it, they're there in their millions to share it and improve it. And then once you've done that, you've got a kind of iterative process taking place. Who knows where this could go? So I wholly agree with you.
And by the way, the TES Connect has opened up a U.S. office. It's called Share My Lesson, and it's supported by the AFT. So they too are looking at this question of improving the content and what that means for teachers using it, not only improving it, but how to use it. So good point, David.
But Bobbi, can I say, Michelle's point is brilliant, because she's absolutely right. If we become complacent or made complacent by the numbers, this will kind of dribble to a halt. What this indicates is sheer levels of interest and engagement by teachers. This is a starting point, not an end point. Sorry, Bobbi.
Just one more thing, because I'm really engaged right now. I think part of attacking that problem is addressing the control. Who is in the position to determine, to make those decisions to say, we need to start doing this now, we need to bring really advanced skills and completely disrupt the paradigm of how we're approaching education. And I think that is where policy comes in. So maybe my question to you is, how could we do that in the United States? Like, I don't know. I'm really engaged, and I want to push this forward.
Okay, I mean, this is a great forum to talk in, because you're tossing ideas around. It may well end up being, how about this for a revolution? It could end up being pupil-driven. It could just be that young people come to school and say, I was on YouTube last night, and this is how I've reconstructed my maths lesson. I got this, 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 and this. It could be that way. I make all my own clips on Final Cut Pro. It's a gas. Someone took that away from me, I'd be really pissed off, you know?
Well, David, we have time for one more question. In the audience, we're so pleased to have you. I can't see, but we're so pleased to have you. And I will share with the audience, David is here on video because I shared his wonderful ability to converse and speak with students, and he's going to be arriving here on Thursday to be the graduation speaker for the Graduate School of Education. So we got him to speak on video instead of being here in person for our meeting. So for those of you that are here at the graduate school, please come and hear him. He's going to be phenomenal. And I really appreciate this. Is a phenomenal experience for us all. Thank you so much.
Bobbi, thank you very much indeed.
We'll see you on Thursday.
See you Thursday. Good night, Annie.
Great.